Yesterday's photographs of Vladimir Putin and Barack Obama staring each other down. But let's show you the front of the Japan Times. There is a picture of President Obama at the ASEAN summit in Laos. But the story is about Rodrigo Duterte, the president of the Philippines, having earlier in the week used obscene language to insult Mr. Obama ahead of that meeting in Laos and now expressing regret. Those obscene remarks came in response to the possibility that Mr. Obama may well raise the issue of extrajudicial killings in the Philippines during its violent anti-drugs campaign.
One of the UN's most senior human rights officials has called the Dutch politician Geert Wilders a religious bigot comparable to Islamic State militants. This is in the Times, quoting Mr. Wilders hitting back at Zayed Ra'ad al-Hussein, saying Islam and freedom are incompatible.
The Telegraph leads with comments from a British judge challenging Islamist extremists for living on state benefits while claiming to despise Western democracy. Those words came as the judge sentenced the radical preacher here in the UK, Anjem Choudary, to 5.5 years in prison.
Now, this is the front page of today's International New York Times, looking at the fears that Brazilian women in politics will suffer following the ousting of Brazil's first female president, Dilma Rousseff.
It's been called a milestone in the world of negative interest rates as German multinational Henkel and French, the drug maker Sanofi, become the first public companies to sell negative yield bonds. It's in the Wall Street Journal. Sally will tell us what that means.
Alpesh will. And finally, also in the Times, are you a cafe owner lying awake, worrying about the reviews you might get from those who visited your cafe and what they say online? Some owners are fighting back, writing on blackboards responses such as, "Come and try the worst porridge that one woman on TripAdvisor had in her life."
Porridge. Alpesh Patel, new in her suit, CEO at Profinium Partners. Very nice.
Good morning.
You had no hair there on your chin, Alpesh. Good morning.
How are you? Good morning. Good morning.
I'm very well. You cannot insult the President of the United States with the words that Rodrigo Duterte used and hope to get away with it. And Obama said, you know what, you wanted a bilateral meeting? Not happening.
Well, you know, I actually sympathise with the Philippine president, and I'll tell you why. At least they've got a proper war on drugs. Let's remember why he was annoyed. He was annoyed because the allegation from the press was the US president's going to talk to him about these extrajudicial killings of drug dealers, of people who are destroying the Philippine community, who are increasing crime rates, causing murder, death, mayhem. And the Philippine president's trying to sort that out, and that's why he got angry. And I think he's right to be angry, because if the Americans had a proper war on drugs, then they wouldn't be just blaming the Mexicans, as Donald Trump is doing, about all their ills and problems, and they might be a healthier society for it.
The concern is, though, that this war on drugs that you explain, I mean, thousands of people have been killed, many have been put in prison. It's not being done in a transparent way, and therefore nobody actually knows how this is being outworked, this war on drugs, as it were.
Can
That's
I back
the concern.
that up with figures?
Yeah,
because the national head of the police in the Philippines told a Senate inquiry, out of, it was 1,800 deaths at the time, since the 30th of June that Mr. Duterte came to power, out of those 1,800 deaths, he could account for 750 of them. So that's however many it is, almost 1,100 that he could not account for.
You're absolutely right. We should have a proper legal process. Everybody should be like, you know, Britain when it comes to the judicial system, the best in the world. You're absolutely right. But actually, in a country which is in as much a mess as this, there is, I'm sure, a pendulum and a balance, and I suspect it needs to swing a bit more in the direction of the president of the Philippines is taking it, and probably a little bit less in terms of the direction of the human rights of drug dealers, is all I'm saying.
But no matter what your policy may be and what criticism you may face from your counterparts around the world, this kind of statement in front of the international press,
the Americans are going to take it for a very simple reason. First of all, yes, like President Obama said, it's colourful language. More importantly, they've got 5 naval bases in the Philippines, which are just as important to the United States as they are to the Philippines itself, which is probably why the Philippine president apologised. But make no mistake, they're equally important to the Americans when it comes to the balance of power in the South China Seas and balancing against the Chinese. So the Americans will suck it up. But actually, it's a good lesson on how to run a proper war on drugs and against these evil people.
Did you hear the quote from the UN Human Rights Commissioner? He mentioned Viktor Orban in Hungary. He mentioned Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. He mentioned Nigel Farage here in the UK, Donald Trump in the United States. He called them fantasists and political demagogues who are looking at the past days of halcyon moments.
Sunlit
everybody
fields.
will be reunited behind one religion. He said that's not the real world anymore. And Geert Wilders has had his say now.
I mean, basically, what the UN Human Rights Commissioner is saying is that the people on the extreme right are the equivalent on the right as Daesh is in terms of Islamists and extremism on that side. What's interesting about this is what he's actually pointing to is this growth in populism around the world. Basically, to summarise it, if you want to get elected anywhere in public office, be anti-Muslim. It's that simple. It'll get you elected. And that's what he's saying is the problem.
Depends where you are in the world.
Pretty
not
much. Well, obviously, you're not going to do it in a Muslim country,
No.
Sally. I absolutely agree. But Western Europe, North America, it's going to work. Unfortunately, sadly, and it's working, and that's what he's trying to highlight. Because, of course, it then spills over into emboldening members of the public, as we've seen after Brexit, where they feel they can be abusive towards ethnic minorities, let alone Muslims. But basically, if you look like even me, that's it. You must be a terrorist undercover and all the rest of it. And we've seen crime reporting has increased after Brexit as a result. And his point is this populism leads to making a worse country, or these nations a worse continent for all of us as a result. And he's likening one side to the other, which may or may not be right. But the point is this rise of populism is something which is something we should be concerned about, because it's probably not the kind of continent we all want to live in, except the 10% who believe in some kind of Aryan past.
But, you know, the front page of the Daily Telegraph, this kind of story doesn't help at all, does it?
Yeah, if you want to sell newspapers, if you want to get elected or sell newspapers, just be anti-Muslim. It's really straightforward and it works every time. The Telegraph story you're mentioning about Anjem Choudary, who's been sentenced, I think, to 5 years in prison for inciting
support of
I'm going to call them Daesh, because apparently they get really annoyed if you call them Daesh. Well, you know what the bigger problem here is? I was looking at some of the statistics. What happens when they're in prison? Okay, the radicals. We've seen reports that actually you get, and I was looking
They're recruiting.
They're recruiting jihadi training camps in prisons, basically. So actually, he's gone to a place where he might not be too unpleased or displeased by it, because he'll be thinking, great, now I can start recruiting some more. We've got a problem with our prisons in the UK, and probably in the US and in Western liberal democracies, which is what the Telegraph refers to. 14% of the population in British prisons are Muslim, which is 3 times more than the population at large. So there's a bigger issue about how they're being treated in any event, let alone the fact that it's not that Western liberal democracy is necessarily light-handed, which is what the Telegraph's saying. 3 times more than the pro-rata population are in prison. So they are suffering disproportionately, you could argue.
We've only got a minute to go, you know.
OK, let's go over the feature, as it is, of the International New York Times about women in politics in Brazil, and go to this story about, what is it, negative yield interest rates? What's going on there?
I'll let Alpesh explain that. He's much better than I am.
Basically, what the central banks do, because they're so worried about low growth, is what they're saying is we're going to lend money to companies and we're going to pay them. So they don't have to give us, basically, they don't have to pay us interest. We'll give them interest. Obviously, they've got to pay the capital back. And this is actually great news for companies, because they're getting dirt cheap money. Hopefully, it should mean greater employment, more job security for all of us throughout Europe, because it's also happening in the UK as well as mainland Europe.
That's the economic theory, though, but we're not seeing companies expanding and employing more people, and
we're not getting massive growth.
We're not seeing that, are we?
But the idea is that's why we're having to do it, because it could have been worse if we didn't. Do it. By the way, Brazil, a woman killed every 2 hours and assaulted every 15 minutes. That's the statistics with Brazil, and they've just impeached their first female president.
We're off air, Alpesh. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Excellent.